I'm here with Kelsey from Toe by Toe, and let me just start by telling everybody watching that my mum actually used Toe by Toe with my brother, and she believes it was the turning point that dramatically improved his reading. So this is why I actually really wanted to interview you. There's been a high push on improving literacy skills in this country, and the method we're going to discuss helps that generally, doesn't it?
It does. What Toe by Toe does, it provides the foundations of reading, the decoding skills, which are absolutely essential. Without those decoding skills, the ability to read English confidently and fluently, it's very difficult to gain benefit from other subjects. Other subjects, they require those decoding skills. You must be able to read. Even mathematics, for example, increasingly you get questions in maths which are written questions. So for a dyslexic student, they have to decode that and understand exactly what maths question is being asked. So again, the ability to read English is absolutely vital. And also, our methods also provide a lot of confidence and self-esteem, which is really important. In fact, I believe as important as the reading skills themselves, that sense of self-esteem and confidence in the student.
Just to clarify, Toe by Toe isn't something that's purely just for dyslexia. It can also be used for those struggling with reading skills, spelling, or even adults who just want to improve their reading skills for whatever reason.
It can. Toe by Toe will work for anyone who needs help in decoding the English language. It's whatever the nature of the reading problem, Toe by Toe will help. From 7 up to 70, adults can do it as well. Now, in our experience, a lot of the reading problems, that we think the vast majority are caused by dyslexia, either severe or slight or moderate. But regardless of that, whatever's causing the problem, Toe by Toe will make a serious difference and will really help and improve their decoding skills, their confidence, and it can be used across age groups. There tends to be a development around about the age of 7 with dyslexic. So we normally say with dyslexic children, you would wait until they were 7 before you started it, because there's been that phonological development where they can match sounds and symbols easier. But for students younger than 7 without any dyslexia, they can do Toe by Toe at the age of 5, as you would find.
So, can you tell me a little bit about the origins of Toe by Toe and how this method actually first developed?
Well, the origins really lie with one person, my mother, Keda Cowling. Now, Keda became a teacher in her late 30s, early 40s actually, when she actually started teaching. She didn't go to teacher training college, so she was pregnant with me in her 30s. And it was basically Keda's determination to teach all the children in her class to read. I think it's interesting to know about her early career. Her first class was in 1968. That was the first cohort of 40 children that she taught. She was very enthusiastic. She thought, I'm going to teach them all to read. And she threw herself into it with great enthusiasm, listening to them read, asking them what words were, words on the blackboard, read to each other. She was very enthusiastic. She did whatever she could to teach the children. But at the end of that first term, she discovered that about 7 or 8 out of the 40 children in the class had made no progress. That was quite a shock to her, really. She was very disappointed to find that. So the next year, she redoubled her efforts. She thought, okay, I'll make sure this time that all the children learn to read. At the end of that year, she threw herself into it with great gusto and enthusiasm, did as much as she could. And she found at the end of that year, once again, 7 or 8 children in the class of 40, roughly 20%, had made no progress. So the interesting thing was that the 3rd year, she thought, I'll have a different approach. So she basically ignored the children who were reading okay. She picked out the 7 or 8 early on who were really struggling, and she spent all her time with those children. The other members of the class, she said, go get a book, read to each other, read to yourself. I'm busy. She wouldn't be able to do it now in schools, it wouldn't be allowed. So that's what she did the 3rd year. At the end of that year, she found that the 7 or 8 who she spent all her time teaching had made no progress, or very little, and the galling thing was that the children that she hadn't taught, she more or less ignored, so go and get a book from the shelf, they'd all improved rapidly. That was a turning point for her. She realised there was something different about these 7 or 8. She knew they were bright kids, she knew they had lots of potential, but she also knew there was something different about them in the way their brains were wired, and that's when dyslexia was first an issue for her, and she started to learn about it and develop her own methods. If it worked, she kept it. She had control groups. She tried exercise. If it worked, fine. It didn't, she discarded it. And over a period of 20 years, she developed the method that is now toe by toe.
Before we move on to actually how toe by toe works, how time consuming is it?
The principle for toe by toe that we recommend is a little bit often. If you can do it every day, that's great. Or even 5 days a week, 3 days a week, that's ideal. Now, to be clear, toe by toe will still work once if you do it only once a week. A lot of the children that I teach only come to me once a week. However, it does slow the whole process down a lot. Far, far better to teach more regularly. That basic principle, a little often. On the basis of 20 minutes per day, say 5 days a week, it would take roughly 6 months to get through toe by toe. But that also depends on the severity of the dyslexia. That's possibly the biggest single factor, and of course the regularity and duration of the lessons. But the main principle, a little bit often, that works best of all.
So how does toe by toe actually work?
What it does, it goes right back to the building blocks of the language, which is the letter sounds. So the first exercise, for example, in toe by toe, are the letter sounds here, where we're looking for the sounds, and we're not in the names of the letters, we're looking for A, B, K, D, E, F, G, etc. Every student has to start at the beginning of toe by toe and work through. So we have a page here with the letter sounds on, and we have a grid system, where you mark, you put the date at the top and you mark. We have an example here, we've got an example page here prior to that. So here's an example of the grid system with the dates and ticks. So you take your student's first response. You're trying to discipline your student to think before they speak, okay? Take the first answer and you have a tick or dot system. 3 ticks are required for each skill. And there's a gradual progression through the skills that you require to read English, okay? The main pattern is we teach a skill in a nonsense word. For example, if we look here with the vowel digraph OA saying O, we have polynons, polysyllabic nonsense words, long nonsense words basically. So the student will learn a skill in a nonsense word, as here we have flickoding and radpodate and poiricode. And then the pattern is we have real words which follow, which just contain the same skills that have just been covered. So the vowel digraph OA saying O. And you work your way down with a tick and dot system again. And following that, for revision and consolidation of these skills, we have sentences, which only contain the skills that have been covered previously in the manual. And slowly but surely, we cover all the skills in the English language in this method. And we get fantastic results by doing so.
Why does toe by toe work?
It works because it's so well structured. It's extremely well structured, and it moves to the skills of the language in a very progressive way. We use the term toe by toe rather than step by step. It was a parent of a child who once said, when my mother was explaining the method, how she taught, and the parent said to her, this is about a long time, 30, 40 years ago, oh, I see, rather than step by step, toe by toe. And my mum remembered that and thought, I'll use that. So the way the book works is diagnostic. It picks out the areas of weakness with the tick and dot system, and then you practice the areas of weakness. So it's not rocket science. Where's the student struggling? Let's find that out, concentrate on that, focus on it, practice it until it becomes a strength. And the other two elements for why it works are the use of nonsense words and the use of a unique syllable division, which Kida herself created. Early on in her research, she realised that nonsense words were crucial because it prevents the student from guessing or remembering. They have to decode, they have to accurately decode. And when they can decode a nonsense word, a real word containing the same skill suddenly becomes a lot easier. So that, combined with the syllable division, where she created a way of dividing words up for reading, which was simple, could be learned quite easily, takes a little bit of time, and it allows the student to divide up words quite quickly and to get on with the essential point of decoding the word, reading the word. She realised that the other syllable division, which is generally used in schools, is more complex. It uses a form of open and closed syllables. And Kida realised early on that not only did her students, her pupils, struggle to understand the syllable division, some teachers did too. You couldn't really understand it very easily. So she simplified it, and that also was crucial to toe-by-toe success.
Some people have heard that using supporting materials at home can confuse students with what's been taught at school. What would you say about that?
I think with toe-by-toe, there's never been any confusion or problem that I'm aware of. Because it's taking you back to the basics of the language, those essential decoding skills that provide the foundation. Toe-by-toe also, it concentrates also, it has what we call link words, which are high frequency words, which are often phonetically inconsistent, which are required to read English confidently and fluently. Words like enough, or have, or through, or what, or does. These words which are so common, very high frequency, and it drip feeds them into the system. So those elements, going back to the foundations, bringing these high frequency words in, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the simplified syllable division, which simplifies, for example, the way you can divide words up. So that also helps. It's never caused any problem or interference that I'm aware of.
A question I'm going to ask a lot of people, because I think it's one that's important to address, is I've spoken to a lot of older people who have said that they were pretty much written off in the past when they were diagnosed with dyslexia. Do you think that the attitudes towards it are changing?
Yes, I think they are. I think over the decades things have certainly improved in terms of public knowledge about dyslexia. At one time, of course, it's not so long ago, 100 years ago, there was dyslexic students would be meant to stand in the corner with their dunce's cap on because they'd failed to read. You know, they were called lazy or stupid. There's been a massive improvement in that regard. In the 1960s, there was a philosophy of child-centered education, that we need to form education around the child's needs and what they want, and that was encapsulated in a method called the real books approach, where the idea was that all you need to do with children is give them nice books, give them books that are interesting to read, with good pictures that will get their attention, and they will learn to read that way. It was a serious mistake, because of course some people can learn to read like that, but for anyone affected by dyslexia, and you're talking about millions of people, they cannot learn to read in that way. They have to be taught in a different way. So there has certainly been an improvement. I think there's much more awareness in the public and in schools, but there's also a lot more room for improvement. We can still get the message out there so that people understand that it's how the brain is wired. Some people's brains are wired in a way which makes it very difficult for them to read and spell English, and that knowledge needs to be spread further. And also the idea as well, they understand that dyslexia is a spectrum. You can get severe dyslexia with people who are completely unable to read, or at this end of the spectrum, people who may just have a few problems with spelling. And we're talking about perhaps 15 to 20% of the population, depending where you decide to draw the line. So yeah, I think there has been an improvement, but there's still quite a long way to go.
So you obviously speak to a lot of families and people that are affected by reading or writing difficulties or even undiagnosed dyslexia. So when you speak to those people, would you say that they're getting the correct level of support or that they're not getting enough in schools?
I think schools mean well, that's for sure. And I think the vast majority of teachers do really want to help the children and their classes. And when they come across people with problems with literacy, yes, they really want to help. Unfortunately, they don't always know how to do so. So I think that we need to have improvements in that regard. And in my experience, parents know. It's parents that really know. When there's a conversation about the child with the teacher and the parent, often the parent will know that there's a problem. The teacher may not realise it, or may think, may suggest, well, they will develop. They've reached a plateau, but they'll improve if you don't make too much fuss about it. But sometimes parents have to make a fuss about it to get something done. And the parents that I see, they're often quite frustrated. They've had problems in school sometimes with getting the teacher to understand the severity of the problem, and also the emotional problems that go alongside it. Confidence and self-esteem is so important. So yeah, I always say to the parents that I see, it's important to have a diagnosis of dyslexia, because then you know what's causing the problem. But far more important than that is what you do about it. And I say, okay, now we've realised what the problem is. Dyslexia is there. It might be severe, it might be moderate, it might be slight. But here's what we're going to do about it. And that usually has a quite profound effect on both the parents and the students. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we get so many amazing testimonials. When Toe by Toe was first published, the first testimonial came in after about a month. That was back in 1994. And there's barely a day goes by now where somebody doesn't write to us or send us a message saying thank you, or thank Kida for writing this book. And the reason is, it's a psychological fact that quite often, or very soon in Toe by Toe, students themselves realise they're improving. Usually when maybe a quarter of the book has gone, they think, I can see I'm getting somewhere here. And that psychological change, and I've seen it hundreds of times, is so important. And the parents see it too. And it has a profound effect on both parent and child.
To a number of teachers who said that the only dyslexia training that they've had in their career is about an hour long. Do you think that there is insufficient training?
I don't think there is. I mean, I'm no expert on PGCE, but I don't believe that it is covered sufficiently. Certainly an hour is far from adequate, completely inadequate. And I think there's certainly room for improvement. I think it's essential that something is done about teacher training. So there's great awareness of what the problems are, how you identify it, and what you can do about it. It's interesting because Kida went to teacher training college in the 1960s, and she, early on during the course, she thought, well, when am I going to be taught how to teach reading? Because that's what I really want to do. And she kept thinking, well, it must be next week they're going to do that, or maybe next month they're going to teach us. And then, well, nothing happened. I thought, well, it must be the next term that they're going to teach us how to teach reading. And after that, about halfway through the course, she began to realise they aren't going to teach us how to teach reading. And why would that be? And she realised, well, obviously they don't know. And that was essential. That was a real motivating factor for her when she started teaching, that she was going to find a way to teach the children in her class to decode the English language and be able to read confidently. It was a major motivating factor for her. So I think teacher training is crucial. I'm sure there's been some improvement, but I think there's still a long way to go with regard to that. And I think it's essential that we get that part of it right, so that teachers know what they're dealing with, they know how to assess, and they know what will work and what won't work.
If dyslexia was brought to the public attention on a massive scale, do you think this would prompt the whole of the teaching profession to look at how they deliver lessons to dyslexic students?
Again, I think it should help. The more publicity, the better. so there's a greater understanding, and hopefully that will then show. But I think it's got to involve schools, it's got to involve government, it's got to involve civic institutions, so that everybody's aware of the problems that are caused by dyslexia. In prisons, for example, more than half of prisoners are affected by dyslexia, research shows. It's a huge number. And toe by toe itself has been used in prisons effectively for a literate prisoner to teach another prisoner with weak literacy skills in a cell. And it's good for both. It's good for the teacher, because very often they've had no responsibility in their lives before. Suddenly they're teaching and helping someone. That's great for them psychologically, and also of course great for the other prisoner who's learning literacy skills in that environment. So it's a win-win situation. So the more publicity we can get, that people realise it's not about intelligence, that some dyslexic students are extremely bright. There's a positive side to it as well. You know, they can think outside the box. They can be great artists or sports people. They will often throw themselves into something that doesn't involve literacy. Well, dyslexic people are getting great success. So let's get these stories out there. The more publicity there is, let's get teacher training sorted out so that we know what's going on in schools, and then the potential's massive. We can make a massive difference, because it is involved in a lot of difficulties in employment, social problems, and of course in prisons, etc. as well.
Thank you very much, Kelsey, for coming and taking the time to have an interview with me today. And like I say, Toe by Toe is absolutely brilliant.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.